Okay, back in Portland, where the sun is shining again. Seems like every time I record these meditations, the sun is shining. So it's once again sun shining, air is starting to warm up a little bit. This is the 7th day of March, and this is, I believe, PPM23. Meditation originally written on the 6th of March. Today's the 7th. To make sure I look at my calendar. Once again, we are a day ahead in terms of the date on the calendar because 2004 was a leap year. Yesterday in the meditation, the theme that was introduced, that was the unique or new thing that emerged, was the description of teaching as a gift, and the reciprocity between the human being and being as a sort of sharing of gifts, exchanging of gifts. So I said that learning is a gift to teaching, and we offer the gift of teachability, and from this relationship arises the relationship of being and learning. And Kat, I'm recording a meditation right now. Can I call you back? I'm doing this video blog thing. Okay, bye. Okay, bye. So there we are. The daily meditation is becoming a daily cameo appearance. Ha ha ha. I find it funny. You know, I think when I started this, had that happened, I would have stopped and started over, but the original experiment had interruptions, and that, my daughter Katerina, who just called, will tell you famously of one day when I was well into the process, and it wasn't easy. It wasn't always easy, especially, you know, I had 2 young kids. I mean, Kat, that was 10 years ago. Kat was 9, and Sophie was 8. So they were 2 kids, little kids, and you know, sometimes they would be calling, yelling up to me, "Dad, we want something." And I remember one day in particular, there was the making of the French toast sticks, and the that's a whole scene. Okay, so the gift, the reciprocity between being and human being and being, existence in the most general sense, and in that the relationship between being and learning and happens, so that learning is sort of a giving over of openness, I said, and you know, the gift that we receive from being is that it offers us possibility. It offers us freedom in the form of excess, which is to say, both from the point of view of time, that there is a time that will be, the time that remains, chirological time, as well as also chronological time, but that's not really as interesting, although in some respects it is. And so possibility, potency, freedom. Right? So this is what the gift we receive, and it's in that relationship between openness and freedom, if you will, that being and learning arises. So let me get started here, because I had a thought there I was going to expound upon a little bit, but I feel as if it's not clear right now, or I've forgotten it for a moment. I might as well move along here. Si se puede, that's what it was. And we were talking yesterday about the sign, that the sign that is red, that the philosophers, now understood as artists, musicians, writers, philosophers in the traditional sense, their evocative speech, what they make, can be reduced to a sign that says si se puede, right? So they point us towards our possibility. So picking it up then from 3/6/2004. Responding to the call of being with openness is to endure cheerfully being held out for questioning. This enduring identifies our bearing up for the wandering that we now understand as a giving into the clearing of learning. In this giving in, we have wandered into the teaching of being, and offer our openness as the gift to teachability. If teaching calls to let learn, it is a calling for learning and appeal to teachability. This is why we have said from the onset that the evocative speech turns us towards teachability. This call evokes us, in us, the starting point of thinking, wonder. Let me read that again. This is why we have said from the onset that evocative speech turns us towards teachability. This call evokes in us the starting point of thinking, wonder. Heidegger says that, quote, the teacher must be capable of being more teachable than the apprentices. The teacher is far less assured of this ground than those who learn are of theirs, unquote. Above, we emphasize this point with the exploration of Socrates as the one who draws others onto the unstable ground upon which he walks by calling out to them and setting the chaotic and perplexing logoi into motion. But Socrates, we found, was drawing others onto this unstable ground and into that draft from whence he originally and continually became perplexed. It's a typo. Socrates called out to others from a location where he was already confused, uncertain, and teachable. He remained in this draft because the truth was constantly not yet unfulfilled, an unfulfilled promise which he continually anticipated. His comportment, his bearing up cheerfully with this perplexing logoi, represents his giving freely and authentically of teachability. By his evocative speech, he called out to and drew others onto an unstable ground where others could be held out for questioning. But Socrates himself was responding to a call, the call from the gods who claimed, "You are wisest." He responded to the tidings from those who appeared to be claiming that a human was possessed by a wisdom more profound than the gods themselves. This is a perplexing claim and appears to arise from a confusion about the order of things and inversion of the cosmological hierarchy. This news confounded Socrates, who understood or interpreted as a call to questioning, as a gift. The message from the gods is a gift, interpreted by Socrates as the message that he was wisest and that he knew no thing. He was made questionable by being held out to the nothing. Socrates' thinking of no thing, nothing, situated him in wisdom. In this wisdom, he was wiser than the gods who required, but did not ask for, the gift of teachability in return. Socrates offered this gift in interpreting this message as a sign of the gods' confusion. He heard in this message that the gods were teaching him because they were far less assured of their ground. They put Socrates on his wandering way by letting him learn from others. In letting learning and nothing else than learning happen, the gods held out wisdom as the thinking of nothing, no thing. But in their tidings, they revealed themselves to be in relation with that beyond for which they did not have a name. In calling out to Socrates, the gods emptied themselves of their godliness, of their omniscience. The gods were capable of teaching Socrates because they were more teachable than Socrates. Quote, if the relation between the teacher and the taught is genuine, therefore, there is never place in it for the authority of the know-it-all or the authoritative sway of the official, unquote, from Heidegger again. This relationship of learning and teaching between being in the world and being is thus a give and take. In giving into, the learning offers the gift of teachability. And in learning, the learner receives the teaching from the teacher who lets learning happen by emptying herself of her authority as the official adjudicator of knowledge and truth. The teacher lets learning happen, the apprentice lets teaching happen. This relationship between the human being and being is one of learning and teaching as a mutual give and take of teachability. It is a dialogic exchange of evocative saying. To assign this relationship as give and take is to describe the process as a mutual concession or forbearance. To forbear is to refrain or abstain from, to bear with, to treat with patience, to abstain. In the learning-teaching relationship, we abstain from the authoritative sway. We hear the silence of the willing, judging voice. In this relationship, we see the bearing up is a forbearance, a mutual concession, a trading or exchange of gifts. Here we see how being held out to the nothing is the condition of our being as learners, if learning emerges from the comportment of Gelassenheit, of letting be, of enduring unquestionableness, and bearing up with the wind and tide. But this concession, if it is an unfolding in the already not yet, is mutual, because it is essentially relational. The reception of the gift of teachability of being is received in the giving of questionableness, in the reposing which is letting be of learning. But being lets learning happen. in the processual unfolding of presencing absencing, when hiding in the mystery of the beyond. When we ask, where does being go when hiding, we understand this beyond to be a most profound mystery, a primeval chaos, the vacuity of Su, the emptiness of Kyung, which locates being on a ground that is far less assured than any we shall wander upon. This beyond suggests that being as teacher is more teachable than the apprentice's being. And that's how I end it. So, consistency, I would say, again, I sort of have an immediate response that I comment on. And my immediate response is that there's not a lot of compression. So I'm starting to now weigh in on and sort of put a value on compression. And I think I prefer those meditations when I read them that don't have a lot of compression. So perhaps the reason I even articulated the notion of compression was to come up with a positive for something that sometimes doesn't feel very positive. But there's not a lot of compression. There's movement forward. There is a return. I mean, there's compression in the sense of going back to Socrates and building then now from teachability and the relationality between being and learning on this matter of giving and receiving. And sort of going back and re-examining Socrates on this account, and then saying, that Socrates received a gift from the gods in the form of a confounding question. I mean, it was an assertion, right? I mean, Socrates, you are the wisest, is not a question, it's an assertion. It's a statement by the gods. But because Socrates heard it as something that perplexed him, because he said that can't be the case, right? So that's the whole mission of Socrates. He hears this message that he receives from his friend Chaerephon, who received it from the Oracle of Delphi, who received it from Apollo. So the sort of phone game was played, and he received it as Socrates, you are wisest. And he understood this to be, if you buy the apology, it couldn't be the case, right? So he went out and tried to find someone wiser than himself. That's his story, and he never did find anybody. Now you could see that as Socratic irony, but I've always heard this as the bigger issue when I'm talking about in this meditation has to do with the fact that because the assertion that was made, or the statement that was made by the gods, right? So it's coming from the gods, it has to be true. But because he questioned it, or he received the news in such a way that it put him into question, right? So it wasn't a name or a title. He didn't understand that what the gods were saying was naming him or giving him a title, which then entitled him to do something. Although in a certain sense it did entitle him. It gave him a license to go and practice philosophy. But in the sense that he understood, that he felt that he was placed into, he was addressed in a way that he wouldn't have addressed himself. That's the point. And he, in having this sentiment, was put on his way. Who am I? Is really, I mean, you can read Socrates as like the first existentialist because he's the first one to sort of, question his name, the name that was given to him by the gods. And so, seeing as the name that we're all given by the gods, or God, or being, or, oops, I shouldn't have said that. Okay. There is for sure a lingering religious connotation. Of course there is, but that's not how being is not a substitute for God. I just want to put that out there. It's not a conscious decision on my part. And in my earlier dissertation, which I wrote on Thomas Aquinas, I wrote the word being and I crossed it out. No, actually, I wrote the word God and crossed it out, and then wrote the word being and crossed it out. And that was because I was doing it as a Jesus on Thomas Aquinas, his later sort of the last part of his life, where he sort of abandoned metaphysics. So anyway, that's not the point here. So the name that we receive, all of us, is human being, right? So this is the name, and so existentialism arises in the questioning of that name. And that's the point. So, okay, he receives the gift from the gods. Socrates does. Now, I say here that he, in turn, and then I describe the gods as sort of relinquishing their authority. But in fact, it's Socrates' gift in return. His taking his name, you are wisest, or his title, you are wisest, and receiving that as a question, or as something that places him into question. That response that then becomes the basis of his practice, his art of philosophy, I'm arguing, or I'm suggesting, puts the gods into question, right? Because if he doesn't just accept the title or the name that they give him, then he's, in a sense, questioning their authority. So he gives back to them a gift. Now, I don't know that the gods would have understood it in that way, as a gift to them. But my point here is to say that, to remind us anyway, that sort of the pantheon of the gods isn't sort of the ultimate notion of the god or the godhead, as it will be called later in late ancient, early medieval, however you want to put it, then into medieval philosophy. So the name that's given for the god that is beyond our ability to name it, the ineffable, is the Godhead, right? And so this is in Meister Eckhart, and it's in Plotinus too, but he calls it the One. So before it becomes a religious name, it's still a philosophical name, the One. The gods, the Greek gods, the gods who are speaking to Socrates, Apollo, for example, who delivers the message, stand below, so to speak, or they, in terms of the hierarchy, or in terms of, yeah, we'll put it in those terms, they are below this One, the beyond. And so what I'm sort of playing with here by saying that Socrates gives the gift of teachability to the gods, and then it's sort of two things. One, the point here is that it is a reminder, the gods, to stand in a relationship with what is beyond them. And then so talking about the gods being emptied, he's emptying them of their authority. Now, a couple things follow from this, which I don't get into in the meditation at this one, but it's certainly an implication for me, and when I teach this this line of interpretation, I bring this up. One is that the emptying of the god's authority is the emptying of tradition. So philosophy enters in as not a challenge to tradition, but it's actually, it opens up the possibility for the regeneration of tradition. So if tradition grows stale and grows far from its source, its originary source, when it's just reproduced without any thinking. But as soon as thinking comes along in the form of philosophy, again, philosophy, music, art, the traditional idea of the essay or whatever, literature, philosophy then is the moment where there's a possibility of regenerating and renewing, right, the tradition. And so in this sense, emptying the gods of their authority is really sort of a metaphor for talking about the interruption of the tradition's sort of autopilot existence. That is to say that it regenerates and re-energizes the tradition, because it stops that process and interrupts it and sort of says, let's start anew. And something new can happen here. So that's the sense in which we could talk about Socrates emptying the authority of the gods. The other thing that's important here is that the gods, and Plato sort of makes this insight, or this transformation rather, in his writing, particularly in the Republic, not so much later with the Laws, but in the Republic. What he does, and what then happens, and what makes philosophy then sort of set off on this tradition that is putting it sort of parallel with religion and theology, but not exactly the same thing, is that the ideas, the realm of the ideas, and this is already in Parmenides, actually, who is pre-Socratic and pre-Platonic, with his myth and his poem of the on nature, where this youth travels up to the gates beyond night and day and encounters a goddess, and the goddess points to the truth, right? So my point here is that this move that Plato makes is one in which the ideas, however you want to understand the Platonic ideas or forms, they in a certain sense replace that status of the gods. So there's two things here. One, the gods that are being emptied are being regenerated then, right, in the form of the ideas, to which they stand now either in relationship to, so they also are under, right, the law of the ideas or the forms, right? So justice, for example, is one of the important ones in Plato, is a principle or an idea that is has an essential sort of form, right? So there is the truth, quote unquote, of justice, and it's fixed, right? And it appears imperfectly in our world, but it's underneath this ideal or idea of justice that we're striving to create justice in the world. The gods, in this sense, are imperfect, right? So they're closer to the idea. So you have to really think in terms of hierarchy as you move upward towards the heavens, right? To the celestial, to the stars and beyond. And I don't want to take up too much time rehearsing cosmology here, but the point is that the gods are then underneath these ideas. They are less imperfect, I'll put it that way, than humans are. And so, in this sense, too, the gods being emptied of their authority is the tradition of the pantheon is emptied of its ultimate sort of authority, right? And of course, this is exactly what's happening with Socrates' story, because the temple is a temple. It's a very, very important temple, and Foucault makes this point that it's the center of the universe for the Greeks, right? And so it has this history of people going to the temple, generals, everybody from the sandal maker to the generals of the Athenian fleet going to the Temple of Delphi for a council. She's sort of prophetic, as well as she is offering direct, in that sense, direct line to the gods. So for Socrates to not accept without question the message from Delphi is to say, this is not a final authority. It's the equivalent of it in the United States with the Supreme Court. It would be if there was an interruption of that court's power to give a final judgment, right? So the Supreme Court makes a judgment, and that's it once and for all. Now, in our own judicial system, you can always sort of come back to the court in a different way, where they hand out a decision, and then it gets challenged by a state law, and then it comes back again, and then they can either reaffirm their prior decision or overturn it. So, for example, Plessy versus Ferguson, which was the famous landmark case, I think it was 1876 or 1886, it's post Civil War, which made basically a federal law of separate but equal, right? It's the famous case of a man who was deemed to be black, was denied to sit in a certain part of the train. I believe it was in Louisiana, and then they fought the court case all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said the principle of separate but equal, which is of course bogus, because there's no equality there, because the conditions weren't actually equal, could stand. And then it wasn't until 1954 with the Little Rock landmark case of the Little Rock decision that the court struck that down by saying that segregated schools, that the principle of separate but equal clearly wasn't a valid one. I don't know the actual language of the case, but the sense in which there is no sort of link to that. So separate is never equal. That's the point. Or in this case, it wasn't. And so the actual existing conditions for African Americans in the South was that they weren't having equal resources. So, I mean, the convoluted response to that would be, and it was, I suppose, made by segregationists, would be, well, then just make their facilities equal. We still want to be separate. So, all that to say that in the judicial system of the United States, there is a way in which things are revisited, so that to say that the court's decisions aren't final and we can come back to them, I think it is actually the case, pun intended. All that to say that Socrates gave the gods a gift insofar as he questioned them. Now, again, that's a kind of a pun, or I don't know what it is, but to say that Socrates gave the gods a gift, Socrates offered this gift in interpreting this message as a sign of the gods' confusion, is a pretty audacious statement on my part. So I think I think that's me, the 21st century philosopher with a sort of deep commitment to democracy, particularly equality and liberty, those two principles, sort of reading back into it. But that's the point. That's what we do. That's the whole experiment. That's what philosophy is about. It's not, the original intent of Plato or anything. And I don't think, and the fact that Plato changed his he evolved as a thinker and as a writer, he sort of screams out to us, don't just look for an original intent in my work. Keep philosophy alive by evolving and inventing yourself. So I've really gone off course here a bit, and that's part of the wandering. This is an example of real wandering and improvisation. So yeah, that's what that is. So on to tomorrow.